Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another session on the Merit Shine channel, and we're going to look at something very interesting today, and it's in the recent news and extremely relevant for you if you're someone who's preparing for your banking exams, and even if you're someone who's just trying to build your general awareness about various things, right? So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to talk about banking awareness, and more specifically, when I talk about banking awareness, there are a lot of economic terms also that you should be aware of, and what better day to discuss this topic but today, because this is the day wherein we've had the economic survey coming out, and it's an important day because this is the day which decides how have we performed as an economy in the last year. So जो पहला सवाल दिमाग में आता है जैसे मैं बोलूं economic survey, the first question that comes to the mind is, what is the difference between economic survey versus the union budget? That's the basic question that comes to the mind, right? So if you think of it, the economic survey is more a report card, right? It's an analysis of the performance of the previous year versus the union budget, which is more a progressive report of हम क्या करने वाले हैं, what is it that we are going to do in the coming year. Now analogy अगर draw करना है, think of yourself as an employee of an organization, right? So at the beginning of the year, you'll be getting your targets. What exactly is it that you're looking to achieve, and what are your goals and all those things, right? Your performance targets will be set up for you, right? That is nothing but the budget, and the economic survey is equivalent to the performance appraisal जो साल के end में होगा, wherein you'll be analyzed vis-a-vis how have you performed versus the targets that you had set for yourself, right? So think of it from that perspective. So economic survey एक report card है, and इस साल का रिपोर्ट कार्ड आ गया है, right? So let's try and understand some of the critical aspects of the economic survey that has come out today, and we'll also try and see कि इसमें से हम parallelly कुछ jargons को explain कर सकते हैं, तो हम वो भी कोशिश करेंगे. We'll try and explain some of these jargons as well, right? So without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first thing that I want to talk about from this perspective is जो पहला न्यूज आया, which was basically कि आप हम इंडियन इकोनॉमी की जो बात कर रहे हैं तो उसका ग्रोथ हुआ है, and when you talk about the growth, it has been by a 9.2% in the financial year, that is from 2021 to 2022, and this was after a contraction of 7.3% that happened in 2020-2021, right? And अगर हम projections देखें in terms of where we are expected to go, we are expected to be in the range of 8 to 8.5% as per the economic survey, which means अगले साल का जो projection है, that is 2022-23, that projection is at basically 8 to 8.5%. Now the next question that comes in is ये है क्या यार? What is this GDP, right? Obviously the short answer is gross domestic product, but उससे कुछ समझ में आता है क्या? Obviously not. So what is this gross domestic product, right? So what we're trying to say is, what is the value of the goods, right? Goods as in जो चीज हम consume कर सकें, right? And services जो हम experience कर सकें, right? So what is the value of the goods and services provided in a country within a particular year, right? So इसमें बहुत सारे variations होते हैं. You talk about multiple types of GDP, then you talk about GNP, NNP, a lot of variations are there, but fundamentally वही है कि हम ये measure करने की कोशिश करें, what is the output in terms of both goods and services for a particular country in a given year, right? That is the whole context as far as your gross domestic product is concerned in very, very layman's terms, right? हम उसमें बोल रहे हैं कि 9.2% as per the economic survey is the what do you say, projected GDP for this current financial year, and when you talk about the next financial year, that is 2020 to 2023, the number is expected to be between 8 to 8.5%, right? Now moving on to the next what do you say, news item that was basically part of the economic survey. इसमें ये बोला गया था कि when you talk about the agriculture and the allied services, and when I say allied sectors, anything that is supporting agriculture in any way, that basically becomes an allied sector towards agriculture, right? So इसमें ये बताया गया था कि agriculture, despite the COVID situation and the pandemic and a lot of other such factors, the agriculture and the allied sector was the least impacted by the pandemic and is expected to grow at 3.9% in 2021-2022, right? After growing 3.6% in the previous financial year, right? So हम ये बोल रहे हैं कि agriculture and allied sector का performance as compared to last year is still reasonably good. Now comes another very interesting sector, which basically इस साल की बात भी देखी जाए तो it is saying that it is contributing nearly 50% to the gross domestic product, which is the services sector. And इसमें ये बात कही है कि even though it is the 50% contributor to the GDP in the current scenario, it basically was the hardest hit, right? And these segments obviously are services में क्या होता है? There is a human involvement, right? Human contact is there. So you talk about many of the sectors, you talk about the IT BPO, you talk about your tourism sector, right? So many other allied sectors that are there within the startup ecosystem as well. All of these were definitely impacted by the pandemic situation. And isme ye hai ki it is estimated to grow at 8.2% in this financial year, following a contraction last year at 8.4%. Right, so from a drop of 8.4, it is basically at 8.2% this year. But the point is, abhi bhi, it is definitely the hardest hit sectors as far as the pandemic is concerned. Right, so if I look at the next segment, which basically talks about the total consumption. Now, the total consumption is estimated to have grown at 7% in 2021-2022. So when I say consumption, what is consumption? Anything that is getting consumed. Now, it could be a goods, matlab anything that you have bought for yourself, or it could be, let's say, any kind of food item also, or it could be any kind of services that you actually used up in the last year, right? So all of that is a part of consumption. And the important thing is that in this entire economic scenario, a lot of consumption was also driven by some of the actions and initiatives taken by the government in the form of increased government spending, right? Government ने ज़्यादा spend किया, because of which you basically had all of these stimulus packages that were provided to various sectors and segments, many initiatives taken by the government, because of which your government spending increased. As a result, a lot of impetus was there towards spending also and consumption also. That was the whole idea. Now, moving on to another very interesting aspect, which is the target that we had set for ourselves, right? So we said that we have set a huge target of $5 trillion GDP that we are looking to achieve by 2024-2025. What the survey says is that in order to achieve that $5 trillion ka GDP by 2024-2025, you have to look at spending around $1.4 trillion over the next few years in order to get to that number. Right? जब तक आपका expenditure towards creation of infrastructure and let's say some of the allied sectors, उसमें आप expenditure नहीं करोगे, आप खर्चा नहीं करोगे वहाँ पे, it will be very difficult for you to reach that $5 trillion ka GDP by 2024-2025, right? So $1.4 trillion approximately has to be spent on infrastructure over the next coming years if we are to look at a $5 trillion GDP by 2024-2025, right? Now moving on to the next aspect. The other cheese that comes out is, if you talk about the overall gross value added from an India perspective, that basically grew by 8.6% year on year in the period 2021-2022, and this was after a contraction of 6.2% that was there in 2020-2021. So the question that comes in now is, what is this gross value added, right? So gross value added की जब हम बात करते हैं, it basically refers to the total value of the output minus any intermediate consumption, which means that final output आने से पहले अगर बीच में कुछ consumption हुआ है, that gets removed from that value, right? And you basically look at the gross value added from that perspective, right? So for example, when I talk about the overall scheme of things, then you have components like your subsidies and your taxes also that come into the picture when you're basically looking at deriving the GDP from the gross value added, right? So ये सब factors भी consider करना पड़ते हैं. But bottom line ये है in simple layman's terms कि जो भी value of the output है, whatever is the value of the output minus any kind of intermediate consumption, that basically gives me the gross value added. Right. Now moving on to the next set of points that are important from the economic survey standpoint. One thing which came out very strongly was that when you talk about the exports, and when I say exports, it basically refers to both your goods and services, then we see that the performance has definitely been very strong, right, throughout 2021-2022 period. But the point is, while exports have been strong, imports ka demand jo hai, that has also been strong in terms of its recovery, right? So when you talk about domestic demand, right, and also you talk about the higher international commodity prices, uski wajah se jo imports ka jo cost hai, that has also grown up. So while exports have done well, imports have also gone up. That is the context that comes out of the economic survey. So now moving on to another very interesting aspect, which is the balance of payments, right? So when I say balance of payments, layman ke term mein kya lagta hai? Kuch to payment baki reh gaya. Right. When I try to evaluate what balance of payments is in very simple terms, it is basically the difference of the payments that are supposed to come into a country and that are supposed to go out of a country. Right. जितना पैसा आपको मिलना है minus जितना पैसा आपने बाहर देना है. Now, if it is in a deficit, if there is a balance of payment deficit, it means what? That means you are supposed to pay, or net you have to pay outside. And if there is a surplus, what does that mean? That means you're supposed to get more money in than the amount of money that has to be paid out. That is the context. In very, very simple layman terms I'm talking. So यहाँ पे economic survey के हिसाब से what was the outcome that came out? It said that the balance of payments basically remained in surplus. And this is not just in this year, this was last year as well. So for the last 2 years, it has been in surplus, right? Now, what it has done for the central bank is that it has basically allowed RBI to keep accumulating the forex reserves. अगर balance of payment surplus में है, इसका मतलब क्या है कि you have more incoming payments than outgoing payments. So as a result, you have that balance of payments in surplus, which means that the forex reserves that will be with the central bank, that is the RBI, वो बढ़ेंगे definitely. And where are they? They are basically at $636 billion, and this is as on 31st December 2021. Now this is almost equivalent to 13.2 months worth of merchandise imports, and it is also higher than the country's overall external debt itself. That is the value of the forex reserves that India holds at this point of time. कि जो $636 billion है, that is equivalent to 13.2 months worth of merchandise imports. अगर हम merchandise imports 13.5 महीने के लिए करते, उसका जो वैल्यू होता, that is equivalent to the current FX reserves or foreign exchange reserves that we hold right now, right? So this is good news from an India standpoint, right? The other angle to look at is that when you look at the revenue receipts, right, from that perspective also the performance has been great. Now revenue receipts का मतलब, receipts का मतलब कुछ भी पैसा हमें वापस मिला, right? Any money that we have got, that basically becomes a receipt. Now specifically from the government standpoint, anything for it to be classified as a revenue receipt, it will obviously have couple of conditions to be followed. First thing, it is not a liability. इसका मतलब यह है कि आपने कुछ borrowing नहीं किया, there is no borrowing, which means that आपको ये पैसा किसी को वापस नहीं देना है, right? Then you will consider it as a revenue receipt. And इसको लाते वक्त आपका कोई भी asset खर्च नहीं हो रहा, there is no deterioration of any of your assets, then technically it can be classified as a revenue receipt. Now for example हम taxes की बात करते हैं, तो जो भी पैसा अंदर आ रहा है, technically that becomes a revenue receipt. And obviously there are multiple other elements also that fit into revenue receipts. Now when I look at this number, so this basically went up by over 67.2% year on year in the period April to November 2021. And again, look at the words used. It basically says that the government has now fiscal space, and these are actually the words of the chief economic advisor who's recently taken over. We talk about Mr. Nageshwaran, who's basically come into the fore now, and he's talking about the government has fiscal space to provide for additional support, which means that अगर कुछ additional expenditures incur करने हैं because of this higher levels of revenue receipts, government will be able to incur those additional expenditures, is what is being conveyed through this particular point. Next thing that has come out is when you look at the global innovation index, and this is a decent number in terms of the improvement. While the overall rank अभी भी इंडिया का इतना खास नहीं है, we are still 46th out of a whole lot of countries when it comes to the global innovation index in 2021, but at least we were way back in 2015-16, we were at 81st. So from 81st, there is a 35 notches ka improvement, and we are currently at the 46th number in terms of the global innovation index, and that also is definitely a good positive indicator. Right. Next thing which I want to talk about is that we've basically seen a major rebound. Rebound का मतलब brilliant performance, brilliant comeback. The rebound का मतलब in the sense कल का जो मैच हुआ था राफेल नडाल and Daniel Medvedev का, Nadal rebounded brilliantly, right? So he was basically 2 sets down and then he won the remaining 3 sets to win the match. That is a rebound. So when you talk about a rebound in this case, we're talking about India's merchandise exports and imports over a short period of time massively turn around हुआ है, right? And इसका context हम December में भी देखते हैं. If you see the December numbers from a merchandise exports standpoint, it basically touched the highest ever monthly number, right? So when you talk about merchandise exports, it was touching a value of $37 billion in the month of December 2021 as compared to, let's say, a $27 billion in December 2020, right? And that was the highest ever monthly levels in terms of merchandise exports. And what it goes to show is that slowly but steadily the economy has actually on the revival path is what is getting conveyed, right? And this is again a very critical aspect conveyed in the economic survey, right? So moving on to the next set of points, what essentially gets conveyed here is that when you talk about the IPO market, right, in terms of the initial public offerings, wherein let's say if you have a private company and if you want to go public, right, so you have initially you have a certain set of shareholders that are there, right, who are more like private owners of a particular company, and if you go public, obviously the public starts holding shares in your company, right? And obviously there are multiple ways in which it can be held. It could be you talk about your retail individual investors or you talk about your anchor investors, बहुत सारे हैं. एंड ये हमने एक वीडियो पहले भी किया हुआ IPO मार्केट्स के ऊपर जब we discuss the Zomato story. So I'll put a link of that particular video in the description here. So you can look at how an IPO market works, and a lot of jargon related to IPOs that we discussed in that session as well. But if you look at the IPO numbers, again, that's very encouraging from an India standpoint. And we say that companies when obviously go into an IPO because they want to raise money, right? तुम public को shareholding दे रहे हो. When I say public, it refers to your non-institutional investors, institutional investors, retail investors, everyone. But जब आप raise कर रहे हो पैसा, आप पैसा रेज कर रहे हो शेयर होल्डिंग देके, राइट? एंड शेयर होल्डिंग क्यों दे रहे हो? बिकॉज यू वांट मनी, राइट? दैट्स व्हाई यू आर गोइंग इनटू द public shareholding mode, right? So the companies basically have raised approximately 1.81 lakh crores from the primary market, which basically is the IPO market that we're talking about, and this is for the 8-month period from April to November 2021-2022. That is on the IPO side. Again, a very positive development overall, right? Next up, we talk about the emerging market economies. So when you talk about developed economies, obviously the ones which are doing very well already and they've reached a stage wherein the growth becomes to stagnate at some point, those are the developed economies. But India is one of the emerging market economies, right? So when you talk about the Indian markets as compared to the entire peers that India has from an emerging market economy perspective, India has basically outperformed as far as its peers are concerned in the April to December period. Again, this categorically has been stated in the economic survey. Next, another thing which we talk about is the gross fixed capital formation, right? And this also is set to see a strong growth of 15% in the period 2021-2022, and it is also expected to achieve full recovery up to the pre-pandemic levels. Now, of course, I understand what the question is coming in your mind. Now, what exactly is this gross fixed capital formation, right? So when I say gross fixed capital formation, as the name suggests, I'm talking about the fixed capital. Capital ka matlab any increase in the physical value of the assets, right? So net increase in the physical value of assets, right? Wherein you look at predominantly kya investments हुए हैं minus any kind of disposals that may have happened. So that is the net increase. Investments minus disposals in the physical value of your assets, and isme agar any kind of consumption that has happened, right? So any kind of depreciation, that is not accounted for in this, right? So essentially net increase in your value of your physical assets, right? Basically looking at your investments minus your disposals. That's what refers to your gross fixed capital formation, right? Now moving on to the next element, when you look at the overall spending that has been there on the social services, that has also risen to rupees 20 lakh crore approximately in the period 2021-2022. So again a very important aspect in the context of social expenditure as well. Now when I look at the numbers from a startup standpoint, it is absolutely phenomenal, right? So India basically saw 44 unicorns. As per the economic survey, we saw 44 unicorns that were born in 2021. Now the question comes is, what is a unicorn? Any company or any startup that is valued at $1 billion or higher is a unicorn. But forget that, we recently had some news appearing on one of the companies actually turning a decacorn also. So write in the comment section, what do you mean by a decacorn, right? So check that and let me know. And which was this company that turned a decacorn recently? So check that out and let me know. But it's a great news from a startup ecosystem perspective, right? Look at this. Number of new recognized startups that has basically increased from mere 733 that was there in 2016-17 to a whopping 14,000 that is there in 2021-22, and it is still expected to go higher. And when you look at the overall startup ecosystem, India has now become the third biggest or third largest in terms of the contributor, and it basically moved UK behind. So essentially you have US, China, and now India in the third position in terms of the overall startup ecosystem as well. So that is again a phenomenal achievement from a startup perspective, right? Next thing that you talk about is, even when you talk about the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, right? So basically you had 1.14 crore houses that were sanctioned, and 53 lakh of those houses have actually been completed, and this is basically in the context of your urban areas. Another important aspect that was highlighted in the economic survey was when you look at the NPS and the Atal Pension Yojana, right? So you talk about the National Pension System and of course the Atal Pension Yojana, that basically saw an increase up to 23.7% from, let's say, 3.74 crore subscribers that were there in September 2020 to a significantly higher number, which is 4.63 crore subscribers by September 2021. Now, why does this become important? Because people are looking at retirement as an important part of their life, right? And they want to save for their retirement. So a savings mentality is coming from a retirement perspective as well. So this jump from 3.74 crore subscribers to, let's say, 4.63 crore subscribers is actually indicating a maturity that is bringing in the Indian markets as well, right? So people are more mature to understand that you have to save for the future as well. So that is where this Atal Pension Yojana and NPS subscribers also actually makes a lot of sense. And this increase in the number of subscribers is also reflected in the assets under management, or AUM as they are called. कि कितना value है उन what do you say pensions जो उन्होंने collect किए हैं, तो उसका basically value कितना हुआ, right? So when you talk about the assets under management from an NPS and an Atal Pension Yojana perspective, that has basically surged 35% year on year from September 30th till the next year basically. That's the one year context में 35% jump हुआ है, and basically it has touched rupees 6.67 lakh crores. That's a massive number, and it is just telling you or signaling to you that India is becoming a more mature economy wherein people are willing to basically invest or rather save for their retirement, right? That is very encouraging. Now, another interesting aspect that basically comes out from the economic survey is when you look at the government's e-marketplace, जो government का e-marketplace portal है जहाँ से आप चीजें खरीद सकते हो, right? So when you talk about that, the prices on the GEM is basically 9.5% lower than what is there on some of the e-commerce sites like Amazon and Flipkart. And again, I'm not saying this. This is basically communicated by the principal economic advisor Sanjeev Sanyal during his discussion on the economic survey. But this is something which has come out as part of the data that has come out today, right? So this is very interesting observation there as well. Now moving on to another interesting aspect. Now when you talk about the bank branches, right? So when you talk about the commercial bank branches, उसमें क्या हुआ है कि द स्प्रेड हैज डेफिनेटली ग्रोन रैपिडली, विच मीन्स आप काफी जगहों में ब्रांचेस हैं, बट ऑब्वियसली देयर हैव बीन अ लॉट ऑफ मर्जर्स आल्सो बिकॉज ऑफ विच द ओवरऑल ब्रांचेस हैज बेसिकली गॉन डाउन ड्यू टू द mergers. That's also there, right? Spread increase हुआ है, but branches overall कम हुआ है because of the mergers. That's what the economic survey tells us. Next aspect is when I look at inflation, again a very very important indicator. So when I look at the inflation, again a very crucial aspect, that consumer price index के हिसाब से जो है, that inflation basically stands at a 5.6% in December 2021. But when I look at the wholesale price index number, that basically has been running in double digits for quite a few months now, right? So वो double digits में चल रहा है बहुत टाइम से, which does not augur well for India. बट जो CPI है जो हमारा 5.6% है, दैट इज विद इन द रेंज ऑफ दैट 4% एंड प्लस और माइनस 2% का जो इन्फ्लेशन टारगेटिंग हमने सेट किया है दिमाग में from a monetary policy standpoint, it is within that range, right? But as soon as it crosses 6, then that becomes a worrying sign, and RBI obviously will have to take measures to correct that aspect. But till the time it is within that band of plus minus 2% of 4%, it's overall okay, right? That is the context. Now, when I look at another very important aspect, right? So the global scenario also needs to be considered. Globalization definitely impact हो रहा है कंट्रीज पे, एंड इंडिया ऑल्सो नीड्स टू बी वेरी ऑफ समथिंग कॉल्ड एज द इंपोर्टेड इन्फ्लेशन. व्हेन आई से इन्फ्लेशन मेरे कंट्री की वजह से नहीं है, इट्स नॉट बिकॉज ऑफ माई ओन कंट्री, इट इज बिकॉज ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट आई एम प्रोक्योरिंग फ्रॉम आउटसाइड एंड देयर प्राइसेस हैव गॉन अप, बिकॉज ऑफ विच दैट इन्फ्लेशन कैन एक्चुअली अफेक्ट माई इकोनॉमी ऑल्सो. That is what is imported inflation. अब कौन कौन सी elements हैं जिसकी वजह से imported inflation हो सकता है? So we talk about, let's say, the elevated global energy prices that are there. Obviously, you're looking at higher oil prices also. The transportation charges that may actually come in. Shortages in terms of the chips that are there. Obviously, इसकी वजह से हमने we saw the launch of the production linked incentive scheme for semiconductors as well, right? Chip shortages भी बहुत सारे हुए हैं पिछले साल में, right? And you also have various kinds of commodity cycles that are there, जिसकी वजह से prices can definitely shoot up in the global markets, because of which the prices in the Indian markets will also get affected. So the economic survey clearly says that we have to be watchful and be wary of what is called as your imported inflation. तो ध्यान में रखना पड़ेगा भैया इसको भी. Right, so moving on to the next aspect. So when you talk about the aspect of growth, right, and this was specifically highlighted by the chief economic advisor V. Anantha Nageswaran, who's basically joined in recently. He basically said that when you look at the growth projections from an India standpoint and the numbers that have been provided by the economic survey, these are a lot more conservative. Conservative का मतलब हम बहुत ज़्यादा anticipation के साथ बड़े numbers नहीं बोल रहे हैं. जो हम 8.5% बोल रहे हैं अगले साल का, the 8.5% that we're highlighting for next year, he is saying that it's a conservative number, much lower than what some of the other, let's say, global agencies are saying for India, right? And if you look at it from an IMF standpoint, the latest update that IMF came out with, it also kind of stated that when you look at the India numbers, India is in fact the only economy wherein you are expecting it to basically have an upward increase in the projection. And isme bhi the CEA is saying that whatever projections we are providing in the economic survey, that is actually on a more conservative side. मतलब इतना तो होना चाहिए is what we can expect, right? The other aspect is when I talk about the capital expenditure by the state governments, right? So that has also grown by 67% in 2021-2022, and as soon as you look at more spending that is happening from the central and the state governments, automatically it should drive the economy forward in the form of various kinds of consumption and development towards infrastructure as well. So this is again something which is a good sign. Now addressing a very very important aspect, and technically the economic survey addressed it by not addressing it, right? So what did the economic survey say, or rather the principal economic advisor say? He said that cryptocurrency issue is not being considered by the economic survey because the government is yet to take a firm stand कि इसके साथ करना क्या है, right? So technically, while this is a very, very critical and an important aspect to solve, because there are regulatory challenges and obviously there is a lot of investment involved here as well, but there are also a lot of challenges with regards to money laundering and a lot of such things as well, right? So from that perspective, the economic survey keeps quiet on cryptocurrency. And it is being said also that we are quiet on the cryptocurrency issue because we are yet to get complete clarity in terms of what the government wants to do. And that is where we do not have enough information on this particular avenue, which is very, very important, right? Now, in summary, हम बोलते हैं ना all is well, all is well, all is well, वही है. So summary basically यही है कि all macro indicators basically are indicating that the economy is definitely well placed to face any kind of challenges that are there. And we also talked about the term earlier, right? So there is more fiscal space that's going to be available because of the increased revenue receipts as well, right? So this was in a nutshell a good performance overall. When you look at it, the report card seems to be reasonably good, and of course it does augur well for a powerful year in the coming year as well. These are the critical elements that have come out in the economic survey today, and of course I hope you enjoyed this session wherein we delved a lot of these points as well, so as to give you an overview of the economic survey, at the same time also talk about some of those jargons and explaining those terms in a more layman standpoint, right? So with that, this is Ravi signing off. I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Until then, have a great day and a wonderful, wonderful week ahead. See you guys.